On the morning of October 15th, 1917, a woman was led out of a prison cell in Paris, driven to a field outside the city, and shot by a 12-man firing squad. She refused a blindfold. She refused to be tied to the post. She faced the rifles alone, standing completely still. Then she blew a kiss to her executioners. Her name was Mata Hari, and to this day, no one is completely sure if she was actually guilty of the crime that killed her. This is one of the strangest, most seductive, and most disturbing stories in the history of the First World War. Margaretha Geertruida Zell was born in 1876 in a small Dutch town called Leeuwarden. Her father was a hat merchant who went bankrupt. Her mother died when she was 15. By the time she was 18, she was desperate. She did what desperate young women in the 1890s sometimes did. She answered a personal advertisement in a newspaper. A Dutch colonial officer named Rudolf MacLeod was looking for a wife. He was 21 years older than her. She was 19. They married within months. He took her to the Dutch East Indies, what is now Indonesia. It was supposed to be a new life. Instead, it was a nightmare. MacLeod was abusive, alcoholic, and openly kept other women. When their young son died, poisoned some said by a servant, the marriage fell apart entirely. She came back to Europe with nothing. No money, no husband, no future. So she invented one. Margaretha Geertruida MacLeod became Mata Hari. The name means Eye of the Dawn in Malay. She claimed to be a Javanese princess, trained from childhood in sacred Hindu temple dances. She performed in Paris in 1905 and became an overnight sensation. The audiences were captivated. She danced in jewels and veils and almost nothing else. She was exotic, mysterious, beautiful, and utterly unlike anything European society had ever seen. Within months, she was the most famous woman in Paris. She performed across Europe. She became the mistress of counts, generals, and ministers. She charged extraordinary fees, not just for dancing, but for her company. She lived in suites at the Grand Hotel. She wore furs and diamonds. She was, by any measure, one of the most powerful women in Europe. She was also completely lying about who she was. She wasn't from Java. She wasn't a temple dancer. She had invented Mata Hari entirely. But it didn't matter. The world believed what it wanted to believe. Then the war came. In 1914, Europe collapsed into the First World War. Borders closed. Travel became dangerous. Mata Hari's career began to falter. The carefree world that had adored her was suddenly focused on survival. She needed money. She was getting older. Her wealthy lovers were now officers and generals distracted by war. And that is when the intelligence services came calling. The French military intelligence approached her first. She had access, they pointed out, to German officers. She could travel freely across borders in a way that most people couldn't. Would she work for France? She agreed. She was assigned the code name H21. Here is where the story becomes murky, and the mystery has never been fully solved. The French claimed she then approached the Germans and offered to spy for them too. The Germans, they said, gave her money and assigned her the code name AF44. She became, according to France, a double agent, feeding worthless intelligence to both sides while pocketing payments from each. Mata Hari denied all of it. She admitted to receiving money from a German officer named von Kalle. But she said it wasn't payment for espionage. It was payment for the same thing she had always been paid for, her company. The problem was, the Germans had sent a coded message to Berlin that the French had intercepted. The message mentioned their agent H21. The French decoded it. The coordinates pointed directly at Mata Hari. She was arrested in her room at the Grand Hotel in Paris on February 13, 1917. The trial was a farce. France was losing the war. 500,000 French soldiers had mutinied just months earlier. The government needed a villain, a scapegoat, a distraction. Mata Hari was perfect, a foreign woman, a dancer, a seductress, someone the public could blame. The military tribunal deliberated for 45 minutes. They found her guilty. She was sentenced to death. She wrote letters begging for mercy. She named every man she had ever been with, hoping to find someone with enough power to save her. No one came forward. Not one. On the morning of October 15th, 1917, at the age of 41, Mata Hari was executed. She had no family present, no friends. The witnesses were mostly journalists and military officials who had come to watch. She smiled at them. Decades later, historians began to question everything. The evidence against her was thin. The intercepted German message that proved her guilt may have been deliberately planted by German intelligence to get a French asset burned by her own side. Some historians believe she was completely innocent, executed because France needed a scapegoat more than it needed the truth. Her body was not claimed. It was donated to a medical school. Her head was eventually placed in a museum in Paris, the Museum of Anatomy, where it sat for decades before disappearing sometime in the 1950s. It has never been found. The most famous woman in Europe, invented from nothing, destroyed by a war she barely understood. And to this day, guilty or innocent, spy or seductress,